The Canadians watching this video will surely know that right now in Canada, housing is unaffordable. And I believe that events in Rome's ancient history can help us understand what's going on with the rising prices of housing, at least when it comes to renting. The Colosseum of Rome was built to host spectacular gladiator fights, and spectacular gladiator fights also implies people getting maimed, people getting wounded, and people getting killed. Now, you gotta keep in mind that gladiators were not, some of them were free, yes, but a lot of them were also slaves. And slaves have owners. Owners see their slaves as property. They want to make a profit out of them, right? And if you just send them to die all the time at the Colosseum just to entertain the crowds, well, then you're going to lose your investment because you got to think about it, right? You need to pay for their housing, pay for their food, pay for their training, because if you don't, then your gladiator's never going to give a good fight. And if your gladiators don't offer spectacular fights or impressive fights to the crowd, then the crowd's gonna get bored, right? Like if you always go to see like a boxing match and it's always like low quality boxing, the guys don't know what they do, and you probably feel you could do a better job. Well, you're not gonna go see them, right? If you don't go see them, you don't buy a ticket. If you don't buy a ticket, then the owner of the gladiators, the organizers of the events and all that shit, nobody's getting paid, right? So the people who own the slaves, they need to have slaves who know how to fight. And that implies a lot of costs. Like I said earlier, training, housing. Rome didn't build itself in a day. And the same thing can be said for a good gladiator, right? Take some time. They're going to get injured. They need a medic. They need this. They need that. So, costs go up. So after all this time and all this effort, you finally have your gladiator who knows how to fight, who can give a good fight, who can defend himself and impress a crowd. And now you have people asking you to bring your property to Rome, to have it fight in the Colosseum in front of everyone, to impress everyone. And there is a very high risk of your property either being destroyed or damaged to a point where it can no longer serve you, where you can no longer make a profit. So you guys can probably guess by now that gladiator owners weren't too keen on bringing their gladiators to Rome to watch them, fight in the Colosseum, because they sunk a lot of money into them. They want to make their money back. So to try to alleviate their risks or alleviate their worries, the state decided that, if your property is destroyed in the Colosseum of Rome, if your slave is killed or maimed or whatever, then we will pay you back whatever you paid for the slave. And since they're going to be paying for the market rate of a slave, well, a gladiator, your investment is going to be protected, and you can either be covered or get a bit of extra money from having your gladiator destroyed. And on paper, that law sounds great. It ensures that the gladiators are covered. Well, the owners of the gladiators are covered. That way, if the gladiators are killed, they still get their money. Makes them less worried to bring them to the Colosseum in Rome. And Rome still has all of its entertainment for the people. But since the state was going to pay the market rate for a gladiator in case of its destruction, so what started happening was that people started going around the Roman Empire, buying slaves left and right. And those slaves, they had no training, right? They had no business being sent to the Colosseum. But their new owners didn't care. Like I said, they'd go around grabbing everyone, bring them to Rome, and then just putting them in the Colosseum in the hope that they would get maimed or killed. Because the slave owners bought them for cheap, didn't give them any bit of training. Then they bring them back to Rome. And their plan is to get that slave killed. Because if that slave gets killed, then the state is just going to pay it back. So that created a huge feedback loop where the more people got paid by the government to cover the cost of their slaves, well, their gladiators that were dead, the more people went out and bought whatever slaves they could find, no matter the price, because they knew that if they brought them back to Rome and they died, they were going to get their money back instantly and even more. So that just drove up the prices higher and higher and higher and higher, to the point where I don't remember how high it got, but I remember it got ridiculously high. And the government had to step in and they had to put on some laws to limit the prices of gladiators and maybe even the prices of slaves in general. I don't remember perfectly, but the inflation price for a slave was insanely high. Now you guys are probably wondering, that's a nice story, thanks for sharing, but what the hell does that have to do with Canada, right? We don't have gladiators. Gladiators and slaves have nothing to do with the housing market. Why are you talking about that? Well, we might not have slaves. Well, we do have slaves, but that's another topic. But when it comes to housing, there's a lot of people who are crossing the borders for all sorts of reasons. And when they show up, a lot of them, they have money, but they tell the government that they don't have any money. So what does the government do? They pay for their food, they pay for their houses, well, their housing, they pay for their fancy cars, they pay for all sorts of things. So now you have the landlords, right? I'm not gonna start hating on them, some of them are complete douchebags, it's true. Some of them are just like trying to survive, they're just trying to keep their head out of the water. So their taxes are going up and their mortgages are going up. So what do they have to do? They have to increase the rent. Now that can work for a little while, as long as the salaries keep up. But as we all know, the salaries haven't been keeping up for a long time. Now add on top of that the fact that the government is introducing a whole new class of renters. The foreigners, migrants, however you want to call them. Those people are having their rents paid for them by the government, even though in a lot of cases they are perfectly capable of affording it on their own. And I think it's at this time that you guys are starting to realize the similarities, right? In both cases, you get a government that's trying to do good by its people, by trying to help out. But in both cases, they don't realize the consequences that their actions will inevitably lead to. When the Roman government started compensating the slave owners for the death of their gladiators, they inadvertently started inflating the market artificially. By bringing an endless supply of cash into the market, they started enticing the sellers to start selling for a little bit more, then a little bit more, always slowly but surely increasing the prices of the slaves or the gladiators to the point where the common man was no longer able to afford it. They created a huge speculative bubble that was entirely caused by them always paying whatever the market value was. Market value, quote unquote. And now the same thing is happening in the Canadian housing market. You get a class of people who are having their rents paid by the government no matter the price. So the landlords are able to increase the rent a little, then a little, then a little, then a little, always driving the price upward to the point where normal, native, hardworking Canadians can no longer live in their own cities, even with a full-time job. Normally, if you get to a point where your customers can no longer afford to buy or pay for whatever you're offering, then obviously you need to lower your prices or else you're just not going to be able to make any money. But just like in ancient Rome, the endless supply of cash provided by the government is ensuring that those migrants will always be able to pay the higher and higher rents that the landlords are asking for. Not only that, but they're bringing in more people per year than Canadians are able to produce housing. And we already had a housing shortage before all of this started. So the entirety of the bubble is completely the fault of the government. They're the ones that are inflating it with their endless supply of new migrants that is artificially increasing the population size. And by paying the rents of those new migrants, that is also artificially increasing the price of rent and the price of housing. Now, contrary with Rome, the government in this case can't just pass a law to prevent people from increasing the price of rent, because mortgages are going up, taxes are going up, everything is going up. The only way they could stop the insane price inflation that is striking the Canadian market would be to stop bringing in people every year, to let the population decline, and to kick some of the people that they took in that are living in the streets. I'm not kidding, some people are living under bridges because there's nowhere for them to live. They're even kicking out homeless Native Canadians out of homeless shelters just to make some room to bring in the migrants that will not contribute to society because there's no job left. There's no jobs for everyone. And while I'm on the topic, there is no other way to explain what's going on than sabotage. There isn't a single government throughout history that would have been so incompetent, so unbelievably stupid to let things degenerate this bad by accident. I'm starting to think that even the Tsars in Russia before the October Revolution would have made a better job than what the Canadian government is doing right now. So I recorded this video about I think over a month ago, and I completely forgot about it halfway through the editing. So I wanted to include a couple of little developments that happened since I recorded it originally. Among the people who were living in the streets and under bridges were international students. For the people who don't know, those people pay $20,000 Canadian a fucking semester just to go to university here. And they're being forced to live in the streets while fucking people who don't work, don't do anything, are being given free housing by the government. And now Canadians are apparently slowly starting to realize that the reason why the country's not doing well, at least part of it, is because of all the migrants, quote-unquote refugees, who just showed up, started taking all the housing, all the rooms in the hospitals and the clinics. Cause yeah, Canadians are a little dumb. I guess that for the longest time they thought that like when nobody looked at the immigrants, they just like disappeared into the ether and just like reappeared the next day when people like showed up at like wherever location, the immigrant would just reappear, and that they didn't need any like housing themselves. Because like for the longest time, saying that the reason we didn't have any housing was because of the immigrants was not even controversial. It was laughable. You would be laughed at for like daring to suggest that the people crossing the border are taking housing. I guess they thought they were like leprechauns or something who just like disappear and like fade away into like a magical world filled with like pot of golds and I don't know. I don't know what else, honestly. I don't know how these people think. But the brilliant idea that Trudeau's government has, that I'm sure you've heard before in a lot of Western countries, because they all seem to be doing the exact same stupid things over and over again, is that, oh, there's a lot of problems happening because there's just too many people. Well, we're going to import even more people, and somehow the problems that were caused by having too much people will just magically fade away. Just like the immigrants, when you don't look at them, they just fade away, they don't take any housing. I still can't like deal with that stupid reasoning.